Good morning. What a wonderful group of folks. I met some folks. There are folks here traveling all the way from Lexington, Kentucky, or near Lexington, northeast Kentucky, to be here this morning. I'm not going to start mentioning names because I missed someone, but it's good to see. I see some happy moms this morning because sitting next to them are their wonderful children. And it's just great to see all of you. And by the way, those of you that have been shocked that you haven't got those flowers yet, Walmart's still open on the way home. When you think of this particular day, I come to it with a variety of emotions. I talked to Mom this morning, spent about 15, 20 minutes on the phone with her, and the first words out of her head is, "How's Hillary?" She was wanting to check and wanting to get her address and make sure everything is good there. And it's a wonderful blessing when you think of, as we've gathered this morning, we gathered to honor our Father. But in His Word, He challenges us with a great deal about our responsibility to our moms. Mother's Day, the national holiday that it is in the USA, the second Sunday of May. The process for that was fairly interesting. I did a little bit of research. 1907, Ann Jarvis of Philadelphia started a campaign. 2 years after her mother died, she wanted to be the individual who kind of initiated this. I didn't have to put this date up here, but in 1910, West Virginia became the first state to recognize Mother's Day. I found that interesting. That West Virginia said, we're going to do it before it's actually recognized as a national holiday. And they had a celebration in 1910 for Mother's Day. A year later, nearly every other state officially marked the day. Not until 1914 did President Woodrow Wilson officially recognize or proclaim Mother's Day a national holiday. It was interesting. In 1923, Ann Jarvis filed a lawsuit to stop it. It was interesting. She became enraged at its commercialization. She was arrested for disturbing the peace at a war mothers convention where white carnations were being sold to raise money. Her complaint, I wanted it to be a day of sentiment, not a day of profit. Oh, but we've changed that somewhat through the years, haven't we? So what will you do today to honor your mom? That's kind of the direction we're going. When you think of honoring our mothers, I'm reminded always of a very interesting story about a young preacher who was listening to an older preacher deliver a lesson. Many of you have heard this. He delivered a lesson, and he said, he started out the lesson, "Many of the most wonderful days of my life were spent in the arms of another man's wife, my mother." The young preacher said, "I like that. I'm going to use that next time I have a lesson." So the young preacher gets up, and he's built up to that point, and he gets to the punchline. He goes, "Many of the most wonderful days of my life were spent in the arms of another man's wife." And he said it again. He said, "Many of the most wonderful days of my life were spent in the arms of another man's wife." And he just kept getting more nervous and more nervous. And he said, "Many of the most wonderful days of my life were spent in the arms of another man's wife, and for the life of me, I can't remember who she was." Most of us remember, and there are many lists that have been put out, but I want to share this one this morning. You've heard several. There have been several posted. A mother's one who will nourish, love, and care for her children. A mother is a night watchman, and she keeps a car out for her children's cry. She keeps an ear out for her children's cry, and she will immediately spring out of bed to comfort them. A mother is a doctor or a nurse, all rolled into one. No matter what kind of pain a child has, it's a mother's kiss that can make it feel better. A mother's one who can change a diaper with a smile on her face. Mother's a timekeeper as she keeps up with all the events in her children's life, and she makes sure they make it to them on time. She doubles as a taxi driver, chauffeur, whatever it takes to get her children where they need to go. She's a chef, makes meals that are best for her children. She's a counselor and works with the children's emotions during difficult times. She's a referee when it comes to disputes between the children. She's a great comforter when a child wakes from a bad dream or bad weather. A great encourager, gives them what they need to succeed. She's overworked and underpaid. She doesn't complain. She's willing to come to their rescue no matter what the cause. And each of us. Now I know in a morning like this is even the case. Many times, many individuals anticipate this moment and the special day of Mother's Day. Others, because of difficulty in relationships, it's not always the same day. But today I want to challenge those of us from a perspective of what we do and what we would do, should do for our mothers. And I want to look at it from a biblical perspective. If you turn over to Colossians chapter 3 and verse 20, one of the first things that is listed there, and it's also echoed in Ephesians 6:1. But in Colossians 3, verse 20, it says, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord." Moms deserve obedience. It's the nature of the occupation. They deserve that when they've challenged us and given us information and wisdom. See, when you look, especially back in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse number 8, and it's really the entire chapter of Proverbs 1. Here is the instruction from one of the wisest men that ever walked the face of the earth. "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." I can start right here and go around there. I guarantee you there are phrases that you remember that your mom told you that became the law around the house. That were the things that would protect you, that would keep you from harm. One of them was always wear a clean pair of underwear when you go out. You never know when something might happen. I still remember that to this day. And there are many other specific things that our moms would share with us and teach us through the years. And as well as our father's instruction, but especially we remember the loving words of the individual who cares for us at a level. And it is that level of care, that level of concern that creates in us a desire to be obedient and to make sure we please our parents, both mother and father. So mom deserves obedience. Even Jesus, and I think it's interesting that the text I was going to look in Luke 2 is one of the ones that was shared during the Lord's Supper. Of that moment when Jesus is there and he's attending the wedding with his mom, and mom walks up and says, "They're out of wine." Now we all know, I told you when we looked at that text, Jesus had learned early on from his mom. That meant the same thing as the trash is full. Your room is dirty. The following recipient remark to that is, "Yes, ma'am, and I'll take it out, cleaned up, or I'll do whatever." But Jesus, he kind of said, "What is that?" He responded. He was an obedient son. In fact, Luke 2, earlier, even when he's in the temple, and he's teaching, and he's asking questions, and mom comes up and said, "We've been looking for you." And he looks at his mother and says, "Woman," again, not in a derogatory way. I would have never said that to my mom. Especially if my dad was anywhere in the room. But I wouldn't have said it even to my mom. I would never just look at her and say, "Woman." Jesus did. A little different in the first century, I'm sure. I never get the intention here that Jesus is being disrespectful. But he says, "Know ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" But there's a key. In fact, look at Luke 2. There is a wonderful moment there that we read even at the young age of 12 in Luke 2. Even after he has said what he has said to his mom, it says he went down to verse 51. Luke 2, 51. I got to remember the technical devices. Some of you are doing this research in. Luke 2, verse 51. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them. But Mom, you know this, don't you? His mother kept all these things in her heart. You ever wondered if there were those moments in Mary's life when she said, I can't tell him anything. He's the Son of God. I don't think Mary ever hesitated as a mom to tell Jesus what she expected of him. In this particular time, it's time to go back to Nazareth. You're coming with us. And Jesus did. The creator of the universe. You know, there's that part of us sometimes when Mom tells us to do something that we think we know better. If there was ever anyone that ever walked the face of the earth that thought, or not actually thought he knew better, but did know better, it would have been Jesus. But Jesus, what a great example to us, that when Mom said, son, it's time to go, his answer was, yes, ma'am. He got in the line with everybody else and went on home. Mom deserves obedience. If you consider, look at Ephesians 6. I mentioned that text earlier. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 2. Similar sentiment. It actually begins in verse 1. If you're there, 6 verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Mom not only deserves obedience, but she deserves respect. In Exodus 20 and verse 12, and that's where this text from Ephesians really is echoed from. In Exodus 20 and verse 12, you know that is the original 10. When you kind of step back from the commandments and you look at them, and they all make a great deal of sense. When you start looking through Exodus chapter 20 and you see, you shall have no other God, you shall not make yourselves a graven image, you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. You don't murder, you don't commit adultery, you don't steal, you don't bear false witness, you don't covet your neighbor's house. But in the midst of those, one of the 10 was verse number 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord is giving, God is giving you. To honor the individuals who gave birth to us, who raised us. And it's that moment of honor. Proverbs 20 and verse 20. Solomon says, and we could spend a lot of time in the Proverbs because many of the Proverbs reference the parent-child relationship. Proverbs 20 and verse 20. I like to hear those pages turn. See, it's something you miss with an iPad or an iPhone. You can't hear that. Whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in deep darkness. Why in the world, even in our world today, would you feel the need to make sure that we understand the respect that our parents deserve? I don't know about you, but I've on many occasions been in a line at Walmart or been in some other outside venue and heard children say things to their children that if I had ever said to my dad or to my mom. Sometimes flippantly, sometimes maybe not intentionally to be disrespectful, but we must, they deserve, we are commanded by God to be respectful of our moms and our dads. I know that part of the reason that this maybe has been lightened or lessened is that we live in a world where with the rapid communication that there are many moms and dads that don't treat their children in a way that is deserving of respect, and they mistreat their children. And I'm not condoning that in any way this morning. I'm not saying that, but I'm just telling you, in our individual circumstances, in our situations, we must be individuals who show our love for God by the way we treat our mother and our father and the respect that we have for them. Mom deserves wisdom. The first text that was read in Proverbs talks about the wisdom of the child. Look at Proverbs 10. We're going to look at a couple of passages. Proverbs 10, verse 1. You go, what is that? How can I be? Proverbs 10, Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son makes a glad father. A foolish son is the grief of his mother. Look at Proverbs 17 and verse 25. I think it's verse 25. It is. 17:25. A foolish son is grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. The choices that we make in many ways reflect the influence that our fathers and mothers have had upon us. And even with their best guidance and wisdom, the fact that the writer that wrote the letter over in 2 John, I think it's 3 John, said, I have no greater joy than when my children walk in truth. Wisdom here, I think, from Solomon's perspective and from God's perspective is our greatest desire for our children is that they are wise, but that they're wise toward God. That the choices that they make are based on what will please God. There are many other choices that can be made, and they can be very successful in the world. But genuine success in the eyes of God and in the eyes of a Christian mother or father are when his or her children have made choices that are right in the sight of God. Of becoming a member of the family of God by choosing to be penitent of sin and confess Jesus as Lord and be baptized into Christ. By living their lives in a way that shows that they trust God and they love God. Many prayers of mothers within this congregation have been prayers for their children, not only to be obedient themselves, but to marry an individual who's faithful to God. And for their families to develop Christian characteristics. And for their grandchildren to be influenced in that way as well. No greater choice can be made and no greater gift can be given to any mother or father than the gift of the wisdom of God in a child. They deserve obedience, respect, wisdom, and this is kind of in that same concept as they deserve righteousness. Proverbs 23, it's already been read, but I want to look at it again. Verses 24 and 25 that Pat read. Proverbs 23, 24, and 25. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. Then listen to what he further says. I left this out because I wanted you to hear it just now. My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways. That's what he said. Let you focus on what is good, what is godly, what is righteous. Our lives reflect the influence of those who brought us into the world and who brought us up in the world. They're not, how do I say this in a way that I'm really careful? On the day of judgment, we mentioned this even in class this morning, your mother, your father will not be the one standing there responsible for your choice as far as whether or not you decided or I decided to live righteously before God. And when I say righteously before God, you understand, I'm saying in this context, we can't be righteous. Romans 3 says no one is righteous. We're all sinners. We've all fallen short. We're made righteous based on what's said in 2 Corinthians when it says, He made him who knew no sin to be sin for us that we might be made the righteousness of God. We're not going to be perfect, except in our mother's eyes. Is that not the most phenomenal concept in the world? No matter how how many poor choices we've ever made in our lives, no matter how difficult we may have made our mother's life early on. I think back, and I don't want to go here too much, but I can think back to some of the nights, some of the situations I got into in high school, and some of the times my mom just fretted about what in the world you're doing. But one of the things I always knew about my mom, I wasn't always certain about it with my dad. My dad had a whole different life, but I knew with my mom that she was ready and willing to forgive whatever. But her greatest desire was for me to make better choices. And I'm convinced that many times in my life, the fine line between making one of the most ridiculous choices, I have to be careful about terminology here, that I could make, and there were those moments that I'd say, what would Mom think? How would this affect her if I chose to do this? Same thing is true of my dad. But I guess many times more so of my mom, because she was one of the most docile individuals I've ever known in my life. I'm speaking of my birth mother. I've been blessed in my life to, as I've told you before, my stepmom, right now I've never thought of her as a stepmother because she never tried to replace my mom. She was incredibly different than my mom in so many ways. Whereas my mom would just kind of go along and was just very quiet and very meek. My stepmom is very aggressive. She stood toe-to-toe with Dad, but loved him and loved us in a very different way. But in both of those cases, I knew my choices would have an impact on my mom. I had a great deal of influence about that. And finally, and there's several other things we could talk about, but they deserve our care. 1 Timothy 5:4, Jesus talked about it in Matthew, but I want to look at 1 Timothy 5 in regard to our world and our culture today. Now this is Paul's challenge to the early church. Their whole concept really starts back in verse 2. Older women, you're to treat older women as mothers, younger women as sisters with all purity. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. And then in verse 8, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And then in verse 16, verse 16, if any believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. And there's this detailed discussion. In fact, in James 1, if you'll remember, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father's this is to visit the fatherless and the children and their afflictions, the widows and their afflictions, to keep oneself unspotted from the world. That we have a responsibility to our moms, and that would include our dads as well, but we're talking about moms today. When they get to the point in their lives when they need special care, when they get to the point in their lives when they need for us to take care of them like they took care of us. We've been blessed in our family and many other families I know in this congregation who have done that, who have just gone beyond and above, taking those moments and times and switching your whole family world. We live in a world that has a tendency as a culture and as a society to relegate that responsibility to someone else. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I know that there are moments and there are times because of physical need, medical attention that is required, that there is no other choice. But to the best of our ability, we are the ones who continue to love and respect and honor, because our moms deserve care all of their lives because of the phenomenal way they have cared for and loved us. It started this with that thought of all the things and the commercialism of the day, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I don't want you taking any gifts back because that's not what I'm saying this morning. You're mishearing me if that's the case. what I'm telling you is the most precious gift. You know, we may give a lot of different things. The flowers, go ahead and throw the list up. I made this up when I was thinking flowers, cards, gifts, time. But genuinely, what does she really deserve? From God's perspective, it's our life's adoration. It's our life's gift. I can remember one of the things that my mom told my uncle that he told me later. Mom never got to hear me preach. One of her greatest desires was not for me to be a preacher, but to be a Christian. And to find a Christian wife. Our lives are still in process. But I tell you this morning, because I was at the memorial of a dear friend yesterday. And in the audience were his children who were not faithful. And the minister said one thing to the family, and he said, if Rick could speak to you, if your mother could speak to you, losing their mother and their father within a year, tragically, their only desire for you, their only hope for you is that you spend eternity in heaven with them. What does she really deserve? There is no greater gift that we could give our mothers this morning than an initial birth into the family of God or restoration to the family of God if that's a need for you. That's why we're about to sing a song. There may be some other situation, some other struggle that you have that you want to let the individuals here know about so they can help you, pray for you, with you. Be made aware of a need that you have so that they can make some choices and be more helpful to you in some way. Any way that we can assist you this morning, would you come while we stand and while we sing?